Leader Wilkinson, congratulations. I just wanted to clarify something from Google. Would you be able to categorically deny that you died in 1784?
Well, I seem to remember that 1784 hadn't happened by the time I was born. So, yes, I did not die in 1784.
Yes, thank you for correcting the record.
Good.
Welcome to Pod Keep Our Land. It's what?
Calixia Lavely
would have listened to. We are a show about Canadian politics, parliaments, politicians, and policy. I'm Erin Rennie.
I'm Matthew Naylor.
And I'm Patrick Meehan.
It's February 6, 2018, and we are podcasting from Vancouver, BC. We've got a great show for you today. We'll be talking about the new BC Liberal leader, Andrew Wilkinson. We'll be talking about ICBC and the apparent dumpster fire taking place there. We will be covering the brand new BC-Alberta trade war, which has apparently ignited today. Today. What else? We're also talking about our new gender-neutral O Canada, and we'll also be talking a little bit about Dave Barrett and his legacy here in BC. But before we launch into that, I want to talk about the news of the week. Matthew, do you want to start?
Sure. We mentioned a little while ago that the BC NDP government was going to be launching a consultation into the Agricultural Land Reserve, and that has indeed come to pass. You may access that at the government's Engage BC website, which is www.engage.gov.bc.ca/agricultural land reserve. Super snappy acronym there. Don't mess anything up. But, of course, go and provide your feedback on how you think the government should be administering our precious agricultural land, both within and without the urban areas of the province.
Nice. Okay. Patrick, did you want to talk about NDP House Leader?
Yeah, the NDP has a new House Leader, Ruth Ellen Brousseau. Ruth Ellen Brousseau was one of the sole NDP survivors of the 2015 election in Quebec, where they lost a significant number of seats. And Ruth Ellen Brousseau famously was known as the Vegas candidate, or the runaway candidate in the 2011 election that won her seat despite having gone to Vegas for 3 or 4 days of the election. And she's worked really hard in that time. She's a single mother. She's worked very hard within her riding, which is a very Francophone-heavy riding, and she herself is not originally a Francophone. And she actually, I think, increased her vote total in the 2015 election. And I think it's really fascinating to think about just how neat it is that somebody could come in and work hard and take that position despite all of the earlier negative views.
So she was working...
she was an assistant manager at the pub at Carleton University.
Yeah.
During the campaign.
And she was basically a sacrificial lamb candidate for that riding, and as sacrificial land candidates are often told, you do not need to do things like go to the riding, because it is very important that there be candidates in all these ridings, but some places your party just isn't. But all of a sudden, in the 2011 election, the NDP was very much in much of Quebec, and they won a ton of seats. One of which was Ruth Ellen Brousseau's, despite the fact that she was on vacation at the time.
Yeah.
She managed to distinguish herself. I managed to meet her for about 6 seconds.
When I helped you crash the NDP convention in Vancouver a number of years ago?
Yes.
Later on that night, I believe I had a couple of glasses of wine with Rachel Notley. British Columbian.
Yes. And so she is now the NDP House Leader, having taken to the, proceedings of the House like a fish into water.
Yeah, she's done really well.
Metaphor is.
Yeah, she's done really well, and I think it's worth mentioning that it's really neat to see somebody come in with not a lot of political experience and really do very well at it.
Yeah, good for her. Okay. I wanted to mention that it is Black History Month, both here in Canada and the United States, so it's a great opportunity to learn about the many Black Canadians who have made a contribution to Canada and the history of Blacks in Canada.
In particular, because this is the way that millennials learn about our history, check out the Heritage Minute that has been recently produced on Viola Desmond, who was denied access to a Nova Scotia theatre and sparked a case that would have major implications for race relations and civil rights in Canada.
I haven't seen that one yet.
All right, well, we have something to do after the podcast.
Yeah, History Minutes, my favorite. All right, well, let's get started. Let's start by talking about Dave Barrett. BC lost a political giant recently. Dave Barrett passed away.
Very very sad. Dave Barrett was the Premier of British Columbia from 1972 to 1975, and during his 3-year tenure as Premier, he essentially reforged British Columbia. He brought BC into the 20th century in a way that the previous government had not really done in a lot of ways, democratically, but also in a whole bunch of concrete ways. And so I think democratically is the ones that isn't really focused on by a lot of different sort of news outlets. He brought in Hansard, which is a service that records what's written in the legislature. Every other legislature in Canada had Hansard at that point, except BC, and BC was the laggard behind because the Premier before him, Wacky Bennett, didn't believe in the idea of writing down what people said in the legislature. But he also gave opposition parties in the legislature research funding so that they could fund staff to do opposition research on the ways that government would operate, which again is something that is a basic tenet of democracy.
I have one interesting anecdote about Dave Barrett. Apparently, when he was just settling into the Premier's office, some deputy minister from somewhere came to his office and was like, Premier Barrett, am I able to make this phone call to Saskatchewan?
Yes.
And Dave Barrett was like, what on earth are you talking about? Yes, go...
Why are you asking the Premier?
Yeah, why are you asking the Premier about this phone? And apparently, Wacky Bennett had been requiring all the deputy ministers and all his ministers to check with him before any phone calls left
only long distance
province.
phone calls. You could call Victoria area, I'm sure.
Yeah. And Dave Barrett was just like, get out of here! Go! And I mean that basically characterized his shoving out of the stodginess of the Bennett administration.
Well, and didn't he institute a daily question period?
Yeah, he brought in question period as well, to which Wacky Bennett's first ever question was ruled out of order by the Speaker because it referenced legislation that had not been tabled yet.
Still getting used to it at that point.
Yeah.
Wait, are you... No, that seems wrong. You're supposed to not reference legislation that is tabled currently.
Wacky Bennett stood in the in-question period and demanded the government withdraw 3 key pieces of legislation, none of which had been tabled yet.
Oh, well, that would not be in order.
No.
Yeah, I don't think you could do that whether there was question period or not. It's just
it's hard to withdraw a bill that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry.
Also, Dave Barrett, the Agricultural Land Reserve, ICBC, lots of other really landmark
He built
policies.
the dumpster that we would later set on fire.
My friend Seamus likes to say that everything you hold dear in British Columbia was brought in by that government. It was one of the fastest moving governments in the history of BC or Canada in terms of the number of bills passed. Just to do a skim of it, like was already mentioned, ICBC, Agricultural Land Reserve, ending corporal punishment in schools, as well as bringing in an ambulance force, both a standardized ambulance that would be provided to municipalities rather than sort of like random ones. Brought in the C-Bus, brought in community recreation centers, lowered the drinking age to 19, which we all view as being, I think, a good thing, or at least we did when we were 19, and a whole host of other things.
Right. So a good time to reflect on the legacy of Dave Barrett and all that he did for the province of British Columbia.
I did actually get a chance to meet him once, about 12 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And he was, he had a twinkle in his eye and a grin on his face, and he told some really funny stories of his time in the legislature. It always seemed like one of those men that was up to something at any given time. And he told his famous joke. He said that he was accused of being a Marxist by Wacky Bennett, and he had responded with, which one, Groucho, Harpo, or Zeppo? And I think that I think sums up Dave Barrett. He was the guy that always had the quick wit and the joke, and really truly cared about people. Really neat guy.
His time in politics didn't end with his time as Premier, though. He served on as opposition leader for a number of years, and then went and ran for MP, where he represented Esquimalt up until 1993 when he was defeated by Canadian Reform Party then, MP Keith Martin, who would go on to represent the riding with every other party that was then
he narrowly lost leadership race for the federal party before the 93 election. And I think there's always a big what if question, is that the NDP really lost the boat on Western alienation. They missed it entirely federally. And the question to my mind has always been, Dave Barrett was always in touch with the people. He sort of had a sense of where people were at. Would he have been able to tap into Western alienation and sort of sap some of the reform wins or not? Is one of those big what ifs in history that I think is a good question to ask.
Didn't the NDP for that election elect elect as a leader
Audrey McLaughlin from the Yukon,
from the one place that was further west from than British Columbia.
Yes, but I think Audrey McLaughlin and the NDP leadership at the time really missed the boat on Western alienation, and so maybe a Dave Barrett leadership would have been able to see that coming.
Well, woulda, coulda, shoulda, but instead we got 13 years of Jean Chrétien.
So speaking of ICBC, there was a big announcement today on the on how the NDP will address the losses projected to amount to $1.3 billion this year at ICBC. And for those of you who are not living in British Columbia, ICBC is the Insurance Corporation of British Columbia, the publicly owned auto insurance corporation, and one of Dave Barrett's legacies, but definitely a point of contention for a long time in British Columbia. I've actually never purchased auto insurance, so
we got our renewal notice in the mail today.
You guys might have to fill me in a little bit here, but I my understanding of how it works is that if you drive a car in British Columbia, you need to get basic auto insurance from ICBC. They sell it to everybody. There's no private option, and you can have the option of getting secondary additional coverage either from ICBC or from the private sector. Is that right?
Yes,
that is
that's exactly it.
Okay, so lots of debate about ICBC in general, but most recently we've been hearing that it's in major financial trouble, and a lot of this has come to light in the last few months since the Green NDP coalition has taken over. The Attorney General David Eby has called it a financial dumpster fire, which is like strong words, because like if Donald Trump is a political dumpster fire, like I don't know if ICBC really is that bad.
Like, okay, it's not like no one could have seen this coming, because British Columbia had payouts that were coming from the insurance corporation at rates well above the rest of Canada. Like, you could take a look at some of the numbers that were coming out of ICBC, and they were, bigger settlements for pain and suffering, but bigger settlements for lost wages. Like, everything was more expensive, and because there hadn't been any kind of, for lack of a better word, to call tort reform in the automotive sector in BC, there was just that the corporation was just hemorrhaging money.
Well, and I think Mike DeYoung literally saw the writing on the report that he suppressed.
He definitely did. Whether Todd Stone did is another question, but who knows there. Neither of them ended up winning the leadership.
Right. So the Liberals, when they were in power, commissioned a report in 2014 that told them that they were in big financial trouble and they better take action very quickly. And they did not do that. Instead, they took entire pages of text out of this report before passing it on to the other minister, I think.
Yep. Essentially.
Basically suppressing the earlier warning signals that the corporation was in trouble.
Yeah, it's interesting because the NDP attempted to bring in a no-fault system in the 90s, and it proved very unpopular, which is a system where right now, the reason lawyers are so heavily involved is if you're in a collision, you can get a lawyer to sue the other person's insurance. You're not suing the other person, but the lawyer is suing the other person's insurance, which is ICBC. And so the NDP attempted a no-fault insurance system in the 90s, which has been recommended by a lot of different independent organizations, but I think people's sense of justice can get in the way of that. And so now they've brought in a host of limitations to what you can do in those cases for bringing the lawyer in terms of what you can get back in your settlement. So there's now a cap. They've brought in a cap on minor injuries, or as they call them, soft tissue damage injuries of $5,500. The ability for a doctor to say that a soft tissue damage is a major injury could go higher, but they've brought in a cap of that. And they've lowered a number of caps in a number of other areas, as well as brought in a tribunal that will actually oversee decisions over when somebody doesn't like an ICBC determination.
This is all to try and reduce the incentive to sue ICBC, and so you basically need to sue ICBC to get payouts at the moment, and it's a very complicated process, and hopefully this brings down the rate of time that people would be waiting for payouts, and also the overall cost to ICBC itself.
So a lot of people are wondering, like, why have costs gone up so significantly in the last few years? And the report is pointing to things like higher ownership rates of very high-end, expensive luxury vehicles, more crashes. Like, apparently crashes have gone up like
Yeah, they have
25% or something in the last 3 years, something to that effect. And then what was the other one?
Sorry, 25% in 3 years? That's insane.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm wondering. Why are collisions increasing, and why are the expenses going up so significantly just in the last few years? Like, we had distracted driving before. People were texting and driving 10 years ago.
Or doing all sorts of things in driving.
Oh, sure, yeah. So it's not fair, I don't think, to just say, oh, this is a distracted driving thing.
I think it seems very clear that it was a fiscal mismanagement, especially over the last 4 years. I think that it's fairly clear that it was not a file that was paid much attention to. That some people would say that it was intentionally mismanaged to drive it to the point of privatization. I don't generally agree with that kind of an argument. I don't think that no matter that a government would do that, but it does seem to have been really poorly managed. And now we're at the place we're in.
I mean, like, financial mismanagement combined with a host of other factors that, drove costs up. Like, BC has the highest costs for an insurance, in terms of insurance payouts in the country. And so, like, those costs had to be brought down under, like, as you mentioned, the no-fault system, or it was going to end. And I don't know, the fiddling while Rome burned that the last government was doing has caused a bit of a conflagration to erupt in the dumpster or Rome, depending on which metaphor we are sticking with at that precise moment.
And Canada is the only province without a cap on soft tissue damage.
Canada's the only province.
Sorry, British Columbia is also the only province with without a cap on soft tissue damage.
Yes, well, that was the case up until a couple hours ago, and they will be introduced through basically regulation orders in council over the next however long. Doesn't mean that you're not going to still see some rate hikes if you're paying for insurance.
6%, I think it was.
It basically, David Eby dodged the question.
I thought, no, he quoted it as 6%.
Did he? Okay.
And he also promised to not bring in another rate hike that high in his tenure, which is
do that.
Kind of promise you shouldn't do.
Yeah, that's not a good thing.
But he also said that the changes today are going to save approximately $1 billion a year for ICBC, or could up to that amount, and so that could solve the insolvency. Although I tend to think that the other side of the coin is where you can save a lot of your money is in reducing collisions. He also talked about that today. He said that they're going to continue to take red light cameras and make them 24 hours a day, whereas right now they're only 8 hours a day for inexplicable reasons to do with VHS tapes only lasting for 8 hours.
What?
Or, sorry, actual physical camera media was what was used in the boxes originally, and it would only last for about 8 hours before it ran out, so when they switched to digital, they maintained it at 8 hours because that was that was about as long as it would last when it was... Yeah, you didn't hear about this one? This was like 4 months ago?
I'm picturing red light camera video VCH tapes that say, like, be kind, rewind on them.
So they're doing that. They're also talking about switching those cameras to be able to also catch speeders, which in British Columbia, for some reason, it's politically contentious, allowing a machine to give you a ticket for speeding rather than making a human do it.
No, it's just that, like, the Gordon Campbell government, or the Gordon Campbell Liberal Party of 2001, decided that they were going to make a dumb, bad policy promise, much like we're going to remove the tolls on bridges thing that the current government did in the last election. And so a bad policy got enacted because, like, woo! Speeding!
But I do think that I'm glad to hear the government is looking to crack down on bad drivers, as well as trying to find ways to actually prevent collisions. And I think that, prevention is far more important, not just because it drives up our auto insurance rates, but also because it saves lives.
Exactly. If we can toast some marshmallows over the dumpster fire, then we might as well do it.
But I think we as a society need to do a lot more about collision reduction, speed limit reductions, all sorts of things that need to be considered, right?
Absolutely. And not just, death prevention, but also injury prevention and protecting pedestrians and cyclists and everybody else who needs to use the road as well.
Mm-hmm. And so they've de-incentivized getting an injury by capping it at $5,500 because financial incentives are how that works. Tongue planted firmly in cheek. Yeah.
So one of the people who has suggested that perhaps one of the solutions to the ICBC issue is to privatize auto insurance in British Columbia is Andrew Wilkinson, the new leader of the BC Liberals, who was voted in this weekend at the 5th ballot to lead the opposition.
I would just like to say that basically what predictors should do is just get the three of us in a room and have us predict things over and over and over again, like a machine learning type thing. And then eventually the one that we never predict will be correct. Like we're just going to hollow out that negative space around the eventual outcome because we're not great at this.
No, I think Erin and I both suggested that Diane Watts would be really up close, top of the ballot, possibly in the first ballot, and hang in there for a while. I sort of naturally thought that it would coalesce around an anti-Watts campaign, but I assumed that would be more of an establishment person, more of a senior person in the previous government than Wilkinson. I didn't mean to write off him, but I definitely thought that it would be Todd Stone or Mike DeYoung. And Todd Stone clearly cheating didn't necessarily help his campaign.
In my defense, I predicted it would be Michael Lee, and I said don't underestimate Diane Watts. And if it was first past the post, it would have been Michael Lee, right?
Yeah, there you go.
And Diane Watts held on until the fourth ballot, right?
Yep, Diane Watts right into the fifth ballot. She was the last one standing.
So where did Todd Stone end up?
Todd Stone ended up fourth, being knocked out after Sam Sullivan had his 2% redistributed, and
Mike DeYoung lost.
Mike DeYoung, most of whose votes went to Wilkinson.
Yeah, it was. Well, I mean, he did try to get his campaign to put his second place votes to Wilkinson, and also his second place votes were party establishment type, I think you could say, and so that makes sense. And Todd Stone, I think people really didn't like that he cheated.
Yeah, people really didn't like that.
So I guess the question now is,
what I was saying was, can you elaborate on the cheating piece?
Yeah, so I guess Todd Stone had 3,400 memberships annulled in the last week of the campaign.
I don't think it was that. I think it was 1,400.
No. Let's Google it. I guarantee it was 30, 35, 30, 36. I wasn't sure if I was dyslexic or not. I thought it was 34 or 4,300.
1,349. Well, even still, 1,300 is too many.
1,300 out of 30,000 votes cast, 60,000 members is a lot.
Yep.
And he did it through the company that he contracted to do it is the same company that was the mastermind behind a lot of the Brexit campaign. It's based out of Victoria, BC, and they're deeply tied with Trump and Russia and Brexit. And so there's an international element to this as well. It's very odd. There's a very small company out of Victoria, BC that specializes in getting right-wing autocrats elected.
This is aggregate IQ.
Yes, as well as Cambridge Analytica.
Interesting. So, do you think the ICBC stuff affected DeYoung?
Ooh, it might have. I find DeYoung's the kind of person that either has a very large and very not hugely hugely committed base, or no base at all. He's the kind of person whose support is a mile wide and an inch deep.
No, I disagree. I think the people who liked Mike DeYoung were the kind of people who were like, I really admired his stern hand at the finance ministry, and
but yeah, no, he's not all that personable. He comes off as a bit of a guy with a shtick rather than a guy with an actual, you can say what you will about the other candidates like Wilkinson or whatnot, but Wilkinson seems to genuinely believe and care about the things that he says, even when he's telling a joke. And I think you can't say the same of Mike DeYoung. When he's telling a joke, it sounds like he's trying to sell you something that's maybe from 1992 and produced by Volvo.
Safety.
I'm not really surprised that he dropped off too much. Michael Lee clearly had a good machine going for him.
No, that's an interesting thing to talk about because Michael Lee had on every single ballot the highest number of memberships, and so all the whining that has been going on about why don't the BC Liberals use first past the post to elect their leader, leaving aside that it is an entirely fundamentally different type of election.
Well, I mean, it is also a fun talking point.
Yeah, fine, but a lot of them say, oh, Diane Watts would have won. No, she wouldn't. It would be Michael Lee if it were strict one member, one vote, and that is because the Souk Dhaliwal political machine, which can mobilize massive amounts of people in Surrey, is apparently well-oiled and turning over quite well.
So let's talk about the winner. Andrew Wilkinson, what do you think? Do you think he's well matched against John Horgan and Andrew Weaver?
Well, Andrew Weaver seems really upset about Wilkinson getting in. And I had thought that Andrew Weaver and Wilkinson had worked well together because just through my own personal work, I'd worked with them on, both of them on some legislation that was jointly passed by the Greens and the Libs in the last session. But Andrew Weaver even personally corrected me on Twitter to tell me that no, in fact, they had passed that legislation because Christy Clark had pushed for it and that Andrew Wilkinson had actually stood opposed to it.
Andrew Weaver, this is going to be really annoying.
There's too many Andrews in the legislature.
Yeah.
And if you consider Andrew Scheer,
I don't consider him, though.
Many Andrews. And if you consider what their names would sound like, if you combine them all together, it would be Andrew Wilkenweaver.
Okay, all right, that happened. The look on your face is so satisfied. You're so pleased with that joke.
I am. I've been laughing to myself about it for a long time.
I am literally speechless. It's just, it's just going.
I had a train of thought.
There, and it's hanging in front of me. This Wilkenweaver.
Right.
What? It's like.
Weaverkin?
It's like a type of exotic spider. The Wilkenweaver.
Weavekinshire?
No, we have to move on.
But it is interesting. The Greens have definitely come out swinging against him, and I think they're a little worried because Andrew Wilkinson is sort of urbane, intellectual. He's a doctor, lawyer, Rhodes Scholar, so he fits the bill of a lot of Green Party supporters who want sort of an intellectual elite kind of person.
He's like Gordon Campbell Redux.
And Gordon Campbell essentially diminished and demolished the Greens in 2009 through the carbon tax, and so maybe the Greens do feel like they have something to really fear from Andrew Wilkinson.
I think that's possible. I mean, like, there is going to be it's not going to be interesting, the leaders' debate. I mean, both of them are going to have a very good grasp of policy between Horgan and Wilkinson.
I think there's a very small percentage chance that it's very interesting and one of them punches one of the other ones.
They could, yes, do that. Andrew Wilkinson and John Horgan both can get kind of scrappy. And so...
That is an understatement for both of them.
Yeah.
Question period is going to be messy.
It will be.
And all three of them like really tortured metaphors, much like the members of this pod. And so question period is going to be very interesting in terms of really tortured and weird metaphors getting drawn out across all benches.
If you torture a metaphor about a ministerial title enough, does it meet the speaker's bar
will try.
Oh my goodness.
So one of the first things Andrew Wilkinson said to the press once he was elected party leader, he said, my job is to ask really hard questions to make the NDP's skin crawl.
That is such unpolitic language.
It's unusual, isn't it?
Yeah. I was surprised by it. Normally you say I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna hold them to account, hold their feet to the fire. I'm gonna make them more careful with the way they govern or what have you. That is some harsh language.
I'm just going to say, hold their feet to the fire actually sounds much more damaging than make their skin crawl. I get a kind of spooky vibe from.
Okay, I never really broke down that metaphor, but now I'm breaking that metaphor down and I'm seeing it. But I think skin crawl is just he is a man who uses odd turns of phrases, and as someone who is one of those people as well, I can't really fault him for it too much.
I am beset by a vague feeling of unease.
The last thing you want during question period.
But he also said his goal was to drive a wedge between the Greens and the NDP,
right.
Which is going to be really interesting to see. I think he's the candidate that I think nobody saw coming in terms of winning the leadership. So I don't think anybody's really ready to know how to, either from a journalist perspective, cover him, or from an NDP perspective, fight him, or from a Greens perspective, hold their own. It'll be interesting as everyone sort of adjusts and tests, because, it could very well be that he flops, or it could very well be that he succeeds.
How is he going to capture the Green vote when he is so vehemently against proportional representation? Like, he has said, my goal for 2018, like, my number one job is to make sure proportional representation doesn't go through, and the Green parties, that was one of their requirement for supporting the NDP.
That's the Green Party.
There are two kinds of people involved in the Green Party.
Yeah, so there are the Green base and Green Party apparatus who want to win elections and very much need proportional representation in order to gain seats in the legislature.
And they're often fairly left-wing as well.
And they are, yes, tend
Often,
to be more
yeah.
left-wing. And then there are this large, and I would say about 50% of the Green vote in the last election, group of people who are Metro Vancouver eco-Tory type people who normally end up being
Oak Bay residents.
10-second so-creds or 10-second liberals. They go into the ballot box, they think, I don't like Gordon Kemp, but he's the best of
They're
the...
pro-business, anti-labor, pro-environment, urbane, things that, by and large, Andrew Wilkinson can represent. I don't think that he's, broadly speaking, environmental enough for them necessarily, but we'll see where he pivots.
Yeah, that one's a question of what come down as the environmental fault lines in the next election. Like, if it ends up being a question entirely over Kinder Morgan, then Andrew Wilkinson is going to be in trouble. But, I think there's a probably pretty decent chance that construction will be well enough on the way, depending on how the next couple of months play out.
Oh, and I'm sure Andrew Wilkinson will come up with some kind of another way, a third way to do environmentalism. Whether it's, what we're going to do is we're going to outfit all the houses with solar panels, or we're going to, he'll find a way to say that we're going to, a pro-business approach to environmental reforms that doesn't involve regulations and doesn't involve taxes, which we know isn't enough to combat climate change. But the average voter might buy it.
You can get a lot of stuff. You can get a lot of people to support incentive-based programs.
People love incentive-based programs, probably because they don't work very well.
Well, that's debatable. I think Australia got a lot of uptake with their conversion to natural gas-based cars, and also uptake of solar panels because of similar type incentive programs.
Yeah. Oh, and we did. I mean, even in BC with the Power Smart program and the Power Smart Your Home, where the retrofits, those incentives worked rather well as well. But you get to a point where you get diminishing returns on them, and the level of change is required.
Well, yeah, but then you need to continue inventing new types of light bulbs.
So do you
for
think
example,
he's going to be able to recapture those 10 seats that the Liberals lost in 2017?
It really depends on whether the electoral reform thing passes, because if we're operating under an entirely different voting system, which, for the record, at the moment I don't think we will be, then it will be a very different political landscape.
And even if it doesn't change, I think right now, and polls this far out are obviously meaningless, but right now I think the Liberals are farther behind than they've ever been. I think the NDP are showing themselves to be relatively reasonable, stable government that's governing in a way that the people generally seem to like. Whether they can hold that in for 3 more years remains to be seen. But I think the Liberals are far behind right now, and he has to dig himself out.
You're good?
I actually kind of like Wilkinson. Met with him a dozen or more times. He's likable.
Well, let's talk about that. So what do you think Andrew Wilkinson will bring to BC politics? He's clearly got a head for policy. He's a very intelligent person.
Condescension, probably.
Yeah, he's super condescending, but he's got a slightly likable quality to him, I have to admit. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because I've just met with him a handful of times or more, but he seems kind of likable at times.
Yeah, it's.
I don't know how. I couldn't explain why, because he is really, really arrogant and really condescending.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, he had enough people behind him to win this leadership. Enough people saw something in him, so...
He works with caucus really well. I have seen that in person. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's also been with the BC Liberals for a long time. He was president of the BC Liberals. So and remember, the BC Liberals are not that old of a party. They've only been around since, the early 90s or something?
90, in their current incarnation, 92, 93.
Yeah.
Right. So being able to work, within the party to hold the coalition together is going to be critical to the BC Liberals having success in the next election. And if he has experience doing that, that will go a long way.
And after all, there is one iron law of BC politics: if the right is united, they win. In the last election, they lost enough of the right to the Green Party to lose.
Well, 96, I think, is the outlier on that. But you would point out that the Liberals got the popular vote.
They got the popular vote, but there was still a very active and extant Socred party at the time. And so they didn't. When the right is united, it wins in BC.
Right. So one of Andrew Wilkinson's first objectives will have to be the upcoming by-election in Kelowna West, which is the seat that was made vacant by Christy Clark when she stepped down from BC politics. Mm-hmm. And I am wondering whether this brand new trade war that British Columbia is having with Alberta is going to be impacted, or is going to impact that race in Kelowna West, because the BC Liberal candidate is
I hadn't thought about that angle.
A
vintner, thank you. Yeah. Ben Stewart owns Quails Gate Winery.
That's going to be a blowout.
It's there's a lot of wineries in that riding, and the Alberta government...
It is like the winery, right?
Oh no, that is going to be like such a blowout. I hadn't thought about that angle.
The Alberta government has just put a ban on the import of BC wines in retaliation.
I can't believe that's a real thing.
For what the BC NDP is doing with regards to the Kinder Morgan pipeline.
Okay, I must rant, because children, Rachel, John, this is not how federalism is supposed to work.
What are you talking about? That's how federalism works.
No, it is not. They just signed a freaking internal trade agreement, which we apparently needed because our borders are so thick.
But this is how it totally works. Saskatchewan, Alberta just finished a trade war over license plates.
Yes, and insurance and all that jazz, and that is also stupid.
Quebec and Newfoundland over Muskrat Falls.
That is much more complicated, I think.
But this is the nature of our confederacy, is that none of us like each other.
Let's try and not call ourselves a confederacy.
Confederation.
Yeah.
Confederation.
But, there are very clear constitutional norms that would say that John Horgan shouldn't have done what he's doing, and what he is doing might very well be unconstitutional. And then Rachel Notley has retaliated in a absolutely ridiculous way by banning the import.
Should we outline what John Horgan did in the first place? I don't think we've gotten
there.
I think we leapt 7 steps forward.
Oh my god, I'm so angry.
Right, so background here. Kinder Morgan is a proposed pipeline that would twin the export of oil from the tar sands to Burnaby, where it would be shipped to Asia. And there's already a pipeline, but they want to twin it, which would increase the number of tankers in the Vancouver Harbor.
Yes, and just for the record, we use tar sands. I use tar sands because it's literally what I grew up hearing in Alberta.
They got rebranded around 10 years ago.
Whatever, it's tar, it's oil, bituminous sand deposits.
I don't know what else you call a tailings pond.
Right. So the project has received approval federally, which has jurisdiction here, but the provincial government is unhappy about this, and they ran on a platform of opposing Kinder Morgan. So what is the BC government doing now to block this pipeline?
So what the BC government has done is introduce a new regulation that says that no additional shipments of diluted bitumen may happen through British Columbia until a panel is convened and they collect a bunch of evidence and issue some kind of report.
No, it's until it conducts more spill response studies so that they're able and prepared to respond and mitigate the effects of a potential spill if given the increased risk of significantly increased exports and shipping.
Well, that sounds
is the argument.
No, that sounds like they have come up with the answer before convening the panel. And of course that's what they have to say, because even though the argument, the agreement, the confidence and supply agreement that Weaver and Horgan signed said that they will use any tool in the toolkit to oppose the Kinder Morgan pipeline, there aren't actually that many tools in the toolkit.
It was always going to be a hard fought
and
one.
So they have to kind of try and sneakily do it through legislation or through regulation on a area of provincial competence. evidence, which is actually for this type of project quite hard to find.
Although it should be noted that the NDP haven't brought in new regulations or any kind of regulations around bitumen. They've done an announcement that they're going to bring in new regulations. And in response to the announcement, without seeing regulations, Rachel Notley has banned the importation of British Columbia wine.
No, that's not strictly speaking true. It's because our liquor boards are insane. So we're now moving from the announcement of a ban on dilbit shipments. Not all dilbit shipments, by the way, but new dilbit shipments, which really undermines the case for that as a environmental regulation.
I actually can we touch on that because you've already talked about this a bit. I want to go through this. I think it's reasonable to say that a certain amount of an activity has been happening. We're not sure about the risk that activity poses, and you're planning on a 5 or a 10-fold increase in that activity. Hold on.
Triple.
Okay, a 3-fold increase in that activity.
Let's be specific.
Hold on. Okay, no, fair. A 3-fold activity increase in that activity. Hold on. You can keep going as you're going, but we want to research this a little bit more.
Well, I mean, saying that you want to research is just, again, trying to figure out a way to attack this process from whatever particular ways that they can find, because the environmental assessment, the joint
all of
one,
that has been passed. Yes.
Has been passed,
yeah.
And so even though the Western Canadian Spill Response Corporation, which is the organization, the corporation that is tasked with spill response on the west coast of Canada, has said that they are satisfied with their ability to respond to a spill of this type, and they have an action plan. The government wants to collect more evidence for reasons concerning definitely that and nothing else.
Okay. I mean, yes, it is. This is clearly an attempt to delay the process, right?
Yeah.
But I also think that if we're doing more research and studies on how to mitigate it, that would be good.
Well, sure, but that seems like a part of the actual approval process, which has largely reached at some point, yes must mean yes. In response, Alberta has. So let's dial back for a second. The 4 largest purchasers of alcohol in the world are...
I love this fact.
The Liquor Control Board of Ontario, the Sûreté de Culte de Québec, the Liquor Control Board of British Columbia, and the Alberta Liquor Control Board. So that is because all the liquor, as FETS found out recently, although this actually went through them anyway, that is sold in any of these provinces must flow through the hands of these boards. And so the basic dictator of the province, the premier, can just say, nope, because they control this crown corporation, we are not going to import any BC wine anymore. And so, a trade war is on. And also, by the way, Alberta pulled out of negotiations to buy BC Energy 5 days ago.
However, yes, interestingly, the energy thing was billed by the Alberta government as being a response. But it seems like they pulled out and the whole thing had gone into a shambles, the energy deal, well before anything on Kinder Morgan came out, which I think is fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Well, so the second response, basically, now, what was the percentage of BC wine that was drank in Alberta?
95.
95% of wine in Alberta, purchased in Alberta is BC wine. I mean, 1.4 million cases of wine seems like a lot, but I know Albertans can drink, so...
So what does this have to do with federalism?
So...
And why are you angry, Matthew?
This could be a while.
There is supposed to be, at least in a confederation, some type of understanding of the needs of different provinces, some give and take, some creative tension, and sure they can disagree, but they shouldn't actively try and sabotage each other's economies in order to make a political point, which is, I think, what Horgan, through his fairly reasonable case to make that it is unconstitutional regulation, and Notley, with her abuse of the monopoly power of the liquor board, are doing to each other right now. There is a constitutional set of enumerated powers that say that the federal government can do certain things and the provincial government can do other things, and a specific carve-out for natural resources that show whether or not a province is going to do something, so that it is allowed to do something, whether a piece of legislation or regulation is constitutional. What Notley is going to be doing, at least her lawyers are going to be doing, is trying to challenge this regulation, which...
Once it's published.
Once it's published, yeah.
Once they get a chance to look at it.
By saying it is not within the powers of the British Columbia government to do that because of one possible interference in federal jurisdiction through either treading on the Trade and Commerce Clause or the clause that says that projects of national importance that go between provinces are not subject to the jurisdiction of the provincial government or interjurisdictional immunity, which are much too complicated to explain right now. But basically, when a project is important enough, the federal government takes control and the province...
Or can take
control, and it can't be stopped or can't be frustrated. You can't frustrate the federal purpose of...
Well, and Trudeau has made it very clear that this project is in his mind in the national interest.
In fact, they have, I think,
used those words.
Specific statements to that effect.
Yeah.
Right. So it's interesting, the politics of this. I see for Rachel Notley, she has everything to lose by every day of delay, right? Because not only does it hurt Kinder Morgan in terms of they're losing money waiting around for this project to get built, but she's also got Jason Kenney, newly elected Conservative leader in Alberta, who is pushing and making a big political noise about this.
Well, and he even said that she should have been suing BC already.
Right.
You know, apparently he believes you can start suing somebody before they even do anything.
Right.
Yeah, there has to be standing. There has to be a thing to oppose.
That doesn't stop Jason Kenney.
Right. Like which puts her in a really difficult position because she doesn't really have anything very clear that she is fighting.
Yeah.
She's
absolutely.
She's trying to make something happen, but she doesn't have anything like a clear opponent.
I mean, she has everything to gain by ginning up this controversy as much as possible, too.
Oh yeah, it's because she can grandstand.
Yeah, she can grandstand, and she can rally Albertans to the flag against, their Western enemy. It's
almost makes you wonder if the two government, if Notley and Horgan had a quick phone call. Hey, I really need. I just approved Site C. I gotta look good. I've got to get my environmental cred back.
Right.
Everyone's pissed off at me. Can I just scream at you for a while about Kinder Morgan? And Notley was like, as long as I get to scream back at you a lot, cool, win.
Yeah, they both look good in this argument, and Albertans don't get to drink wine,
and Wilkinson loses the media for the first couple of days of his leadership.
Oh, interesting point. Yeah.
It's no surprise that ICBC announcement and the pipeline announcement came out within days of the leadership announcement.
Where do you see this going?
Well,
I have no idea at this point.
This is like unheard of in the last 20 years of Canadian federalism.
Maybe Alberta will turn around tomorrow and say they're not importing any more craft beer from BC because their craft beer scene nowhere near as good. And I'm pretty sure if you really want to hit
more conservative their craft beer scene.
But if you really want to hit the pocketbook of people who oppose Kinder Morgan, go after craft beer brewers because I'm pretty sure their clientele is probably much more anti Kinder Morgan than winery clienteles.
Can you see BC imposing a trade restriction on Alberta and blocking beef or
somebody on Twitter said as soon as I find an Alberta product I consume, I'll stop ordering it.
Well, then stop driving.
Yeah.
I already don't drive. The car hasn't left the parking lot since August.
Mm-hmm. And where's the fuel that powers the bus you take? Or
I cycle.
Yeah, and you ever eat beef?
Actually, pretty rarely.
Plastics?
Wheat?
I don't know, also pretty rarely.
Barley? Any kind of...
Oh, I drink a lot of beer.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, barley. Is barley really an Alberta thing?
Yeah, the whole Barley Freedom thing with the kind of wheat board.
Did you say Barley Freedom?
Barley Freedom.
Was that a bumper sticker?
No, it was called Barley Freedom Day, which is the day that... Barley Freedom Day was the day that barley was removed from the jurisdiction of the Canada Wheat Board.
Man, the prairies are weird.
And all the little barleys were liberated to run free and be
eaten up by global market forces.
I will say I have seen multiple of my friends from Alberta on Facebook posting that they're about to start stockpiling their favorite BC wines.
Well, go now. Don't So the trade has stopped. There are no more purchases. Apparently, this happens right away. There's Horgan has basically just the liquor board to respond with. I'm trying to think of what...
The barriers that are being erected right now in Crow's Nest Pass. Also, March on Fernie is a thing, as Albertans are talking about trying to take back the chunk of BC that is under the same time zone as Alberta.
They drank a bunch of beer and smoked a bunch of weed, and then they drove back to Lethbridge. Anyway, yes.
I will say, a listener of the pod, David Moskrop, has promised that he will do his level best to make up the difference in wine consumption.
Oh, yeah. I guess if you're a BC patriot, you need to drink more wine while this trade war is on to support BC wineries. So we'll continue to follow this story. I think it's going to get exciting, and if you care about federalism, really intense.
Children, simmer down!
Okay, last story. Exciting news. After 18 months of debate, the Senate has decided it's time for Canada to have a gender-neutral O Canada anthem.
In all
Big
ourselves
news, you
command.
guys. Yeah, what was the wording?
In all of us command.
In all of us.
That
is really awkward.
It's really awkward. Thou dost in us command is the original text of O Canada, which we changed to in all our sons
After
command.
someone dust protested.
Well, no, it's after all the sons of Canada went off to fight in the First World War. Like, it had a specific historical context, and it's great that we have a gender-neutral national anthem, but anthems don't always have to make a lot of sense. Apparently, like, the anthem of the Netherlands pledges eternal loyalty to the King of Spain. So,
seems reasonable.
Yeah.
I'm sure that, a lot of the citizens still strongly believe that.
Well, it's sung from the perspective of William of Orange. Anyway, we're getting away from this. This is actually quite a nice story because Mario Bélanger was the former Liberal MP from Ottawa-Vanier, and
much beloved by his colleagues as well.
Yes, and he was en route to be speaker because he had a real passion for parliamentary democracy, and unfortunately was diagnosed with ALS and died. But not until he managed to introduce and see passed in the House a bill that would change the wording of O Canada from "in all thy sons command" to "in all of us command." Then it
removed 50% of the problems I have with the anthem. Still got God in there.
Not in our name of this show.
Well, thank you very much for that.
Maybe they should just replace God with pod.
In all of us command.
Does this mean I have to support keeping that line in the anthem?
Keep our land. No,
you guys, we should write to our MPs and get them to introduce this. All it took was 12 times to get a gender-neutral anthem.
And a lot of really childish freakouts by various people in the Conservative Party.
And only 18 months of Senate debate and the proposal to take it to referendum.
I feel like they debated it for very little time. I feel like they just let it sit there and collect dust for 17 and a half
there
months.
were a lot of I was looking at the Parlinfo and Open Parliament entries for Bill C-210, and there was a lot of days where this thing was discussed in the Senate.
All right.
Because the upper chamber needs things to occupy its time, and frankly, good, whatever.
Yep.
Good. Sober second thought is an important function of our bicameral system.
Sure. This is true.
And it has been thought over, and they have agreed with the elected officials and have passed it, and so now it is sent to Julie Payette's desk to await her royal approval.
So we have a new anthem. Well, not a new anthem. We have a revised anthem. Be sure to sing it gender neutrally the next time you rise to sing O Canada, which will be soon because the Olympics.
By the way, if you're opposed to God being in the anthem, I'd do not sing it in French because
no one wants me to try to sing at all, let alone sing in a language I'm borderline not capable of even speaking in. But a lot of my friends already sing the anthem that way and have been for several years. And I feel like if you don't believe the anthem should be sung that way, you don't have to either. I feel like this is one of those uniquely Canadian things where we've all agreed on paper it's this, and you can sing it kind of however you want because it's not like anyone will notice.
Good point. Yeah, it's not like these things are police.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all we've got for the show this week. Do you guys want to say what you have been thinking about non-politically this week?
I went to go see The Post on the weekend with my partner, and I could not believe how good that movie was. It's Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks and a bunch of other people, including Tobias Funke. And it's Funke, and it's about the Pentagon paper publications that revealed that the American government had been lying about Vietnam for decades. And it's a stunningly good movie. movie. It is so good. I could not believe how... I mean, I guess I shouldn't say I can't believe how well Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks acted, because at a certain point you just assume. But no, it was phenomenal. Absolutely loved it, and I really recommend everybody go see it, especially in theaters. It was edge of your seat interest.
Cool.
I was thinking I hadn't had Vietnamese noodle soup in a while, so I think I might head...
The new place right across the street's really good.
Yeah, so I haven't eaten yet, and I think I might have soup today.
Very nice. Okay. Well, I've been thinking a lot about Florida because that's where I'll be headed at the end of the month. So.
Oh yeah, are you going to see some manatees?
I'm going to see manatees. I'm going to high
Are you going to sing the song?
Excuse me, personities.
Oh god, the Justin Trudeau thing. No, he was joking. I'm leaving this one.
Yeah.
But you have to sing the manatee song.
Yes, I will definitely sing
to.
the manatee song.
It'll remind you of second year university.
Yes. And I'm going to eat a whole bunch of oranges, and it's not going to be a rainy, miserable, gray Vancouver day while I'm in Florida, so I'm very much looking forward to it.
Nice.
So that's all we've got for you this week on Pod Keep Our Land. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this episode, please do share it with your friends and your enemies and your frenemies and your grandma. And also give us some reviews, give us some likes, follow us on the social media. We really appreciate your reviews. That helps us grow our listenership quite a bit. Thanks so much. I'm Erin Rennie.
I'm Matthew Naylor.
And I'm Patrick Meehan.
That's all we've got for you on Pod Keep Our Land.
Quick note, I said Sortez d'alcool de Québec, and that means the Québécois booze police. What I meant to say was Société des alcools de Québec.